Okay, just loading up.
Good evening, Rabbi and Shelley.
Good evening. Right. Oop, okay. Right, just to remind everyone, you are being recorded. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so we are up to, there will be a few people joining late, but I'll let them in as they arrive. Truma, which means donation. That's normally how we normally translate it, or literally it means a portion set aside or a portion lifted out of one's possessions. So every person decided to donate generously to the temple, to the Mishkan, and probably the only time in Jewish history where they raised so much money, or they got all the materials they needed, that Moshe told them that they needed to stop bringing. We have enough. So that gives you an idea that everyone was very excited. But in the actual verse, it says, every man whose heart inspires him to give should donate. What about the women? So the men needed to be asked, where they had to be encouraged to give, where the women gave on their own volition. So it's interesting to point that out. Also, the expression used, "V'yikhu li truma," that's what it says in the pasuk, which literally means take for me a donation. But if you're dealing with donations, you're normally giving someone a donation. It should have said v'yitnu li. God should have said, give to me a donation. But it says v'yikhu, take for me a donation. So why is this strange turn of phrase? Our rabbis point out that really when a person gives, when they're giving tzedakah, or they're giving charity, the person that's giving actually is the one that's taking. They're the one that really benefits, because they've now done a mitzvah which is eternal. And that money is, so to speak, in their spiritual bank account. So that is how you actually build up your worth in the next world, as much money you can give away in this world. Obviously, we do have a cap at 10%, but you can give up to 20% of your income after tax. But generally, a person can give more, but obviously not to a point where they'll end up needing charity themselves. There's a fine line there, but generally, when a person gives tzedakah, they're the one that's really benefiting. In the famous words of King David, we actually say this in Pirkei Avot. I can find it now. Famously, King David said, from your hand we give you back to you, Hashem. I'm just trying to find the exact expression. Kimimcha hakol, that's it. Kimimcha hakol, from you is everything. Umiyadcha nasanu lach, and from your hand we give to you. So we're saying at the outset, everything in the world, God, belongs to you. So when we're giving, we're only giving back what belongs to you to start with. Yeah. Alternatively, Rabbi Eliezer also says in Pirkei Avot, "Ten lom shalach, shata v'shelcha shalach." So give to God, because you and everything that you own is God's anyway.
That's interesting, because there's what it means is if you don't do well financially, it's quite okay to give less than you did last year.
If you did well financially, you're saying?
No, so if you didn't do well financially.
Oh yeah. If you didn't do well, yeah, then that's right. Your obligation would be less.
Interesting, because there's that famous joke where the Shnorah says, because you didn't have a good year, I should suffer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how it could work. Yeah, although you could argue by giving less the following year, it will feel just as much, if not more, because you didn't see any of the benefits. Hello, Jonathan. We also say that really all a person's earnings are set from Rosh Hashanah. God decides how much you're going to make, and you won't make a penny more or a penny less. But you still got to go out and work. You still got to put the bucket out when it's raining and collect the blessings. But the idea is, as soon as a person gives a donation, it means they understand that everything that they own to start with isn't solely theirs. They are entrusted to look after it. And also the rest of their possessions or their money that they'd still own, they look at it in a completely different light, because they understand I need to occasionally give some of this away. And when a person works hard for their money, all the work, all the office hours, or all the schlepping, whatever the job is, that all gets included in the mitzvah. Yeah, even though you're only giving 10%, let's say, but all the work, everything involved in the process to make that money, to make your income, and then when you give part that way, you're literally giving your blood and sweat and tears away to tzedakah, which is why it's considered such an important mitzvah. So yeah, I'm just finding that other expression was, yeah, ten lo mishalo. Give to God what is yours, she'ata v'shelcha shelo, because you and everything that you own is His. That was Rabbi Eliezer. Okay. 15 different articles or items were donated to the temple, to the Mishkan, and they were gold, silver, and copper. Wool dyed sky blue, wool dyed purple, wool also dyed scarlet or red, linen, goat's hair, ram skins dyed red. Tachash was a type of animal that lived at that time, but no longer, sounds like it's no longer in existence, but it had very colorful hides, skins, cedar wood, oil, spices, and then special stones for the breastplate and the apron that the Kohen Gadol would wear. And their special stones were donated by the tribal leaders. So 15 different things there. It's interesting that gold, silver, and copper, those are the easiest to remember normally. When you take the first letter of all those three precious metals, so gold, zahav, take the tzadi, then silver is kesef, and copper is nechoshet. Trying to remember what was the. Oh, that's right. So you have tzibor. That was the one I wanted to remember. Tzibor is a community, right? If you take the first letter of each of that word, the first letter, the middle letter, the last letter, tzibor, it's sadik. The bet is Bainani, that's an average person, and then the Reish is Rosha, a wicked person. So someone that's very righteous, they give the gold. They make sure they give as much as they can, and they also give not necessarily when it's easy for them, yeah, when maybe they've still got a mortgage to pay and they're happy to give. Not necessarily when they're have retired and they've saved it all their life, and then it's like, okay, now I can give. Yeah, someone that's able to give all along the way. That's ideal. And then even a Bainani is someone that will give when they can, but they don't necessarily push themselves to give. And then a Rosha was someone that doesn't want to give and only gives out of guilt or because someone's pressured him. So ideally, we want to always be giving, even before we're asked, always looking for opportunities to give. And it's one of the mitzvahs where God says, test me, and whatever you give, you'll get back tenfold. So the only other mitzvah I can think of that there's a reward is promised. If you keep it, is honoring your parents. Honoring your parents, you get promised long life, and also shooing away the mother bird. It says in the Torah, you'll have lengthened days. But besides those two, where a reward of longevity is promised, the only other reward given for being wealthy or for wealth is by the more you give, the more wealthy you'll become. Now, we were just saying it. That's definitely the case in the next world, because everything you give away now becomes an eternal mitzvah for you in your merits. This is even in this world, you'll see the fruit of your labors. You'll be blessed with more money to give, because God is looking for people He can invest in. He says, "Oh, this person gives so much tzedakah, I'm going to give him more." he's a good investment for me to make sure he has money, because it looks like he's going to look after it and spend it in the right way. So I must say, with the Truma as it is in the Parshas here, really all these Parshas are a little bit out of order. Because the temple, the Mishkan, was God instructed Moshe to tell the Jewish people to build it in the aftermath of the golden calf. So Bashalach we had already a few weeks ago, the sea split, the Jews left Egypt, very good. Yitro, the Ten Commandments, on the 6th of Sivan. And then Moshe went up the mountain on the 7th of Sivan for the first set of 40 days, if you recall. And he comes back down on the 40th day, and the Jewish people are worshipping the golden calf at that point. And that's the 17th of Tammuz, the fast day. And Moshe smashed the tablets. Right. Now, after that, Moshe went back up on the following day, the 18th of Tammuz. And he stayed there for another 40 days, and he came back down on the 29th of Av. And then he went up a final time for 40 days on the 1st of Elul, Rosh Chodesh Elul, and came back down on Yom Kippur with a second set of tablets. A lot of dates to remember, but the main thing is the main idea is he went up 3 sets of 40 days. The middle set was to ask for forgiveness, and then God forgave him on the 3rd set of 40 days, him and the Jewish people. Really, Moshe didn't need forgiving, but yeah, he forgave the Jewish people, and that's when the second tablets came down on Yom Kippur. So really, Terumah, the instructions of how to build the temple, the Mishkan, and Tetzaveh, which deals more with the garments of the high priest, and the installation procedure, how they set up the temple and they got it ready. They got the temple ready, and then God's presence came down on the 1st of Nisan, which we read about in Parsha Shmini. Shmini meaning 8th, the 8th day. So after they did the inauguration, installation procedure with Aaron and his sons, and they anointed all the vessels, and they brought an installation ram and a burnt offering ram. They brought lots of all those sacrifices you can find at the end of Tetzaveh. All of this was in order to get the Mishkan up and running. So really, if you look at the Parshas, after Yitro, the Ten Commandments, Mishpatim, the civil laws that we read last week, and a lot of mitzvahs mainly were given during those 40 days when Moshe was up the first 40 days. Really, as soon as he came down, after Parshas Mishpatim, it should be Parshas Kitisa, which talks about the golden calf, because that's what happened. And then, as a result of the golden calf, the way to fix that was building the Mishkan. So God's presence sort of left the physical world after the sin of the golden calf, and it was brought back down after the Jewish people had built the Mishkan and inaugurated it, which we read about in Shmini. So really, after Mishpat, it should have been Kitisa, which was the golden calf. Then we need to fix that mistake. How do we do that? By building the temple, by building the Mishkan. So that's then Terumah, Tetzaveh, and those are the parsha where the instructions are given, and then of what to do and how to do it. And Vayakal Pekudei is the Jewish people actually following through with those mitzvahs. So why is the Torah out of order? This is at least according to Rashi. There are other opinions that say it is in the correct order in this case. But most commentators point out really it should be Kitisa, the current parsha, that deals with the golden calf. So we have this idea that God always preempts the illness with the cure. Makdim refua lamaka is the Hebrew expression, that God advances the cure, or the cure is available before the sickness. So God already was giving the instructions about the temple, because he foresaw, in this week's Parsha Terumah, Tetzaveh, because he foresaw that the Jewish people would unfortunately need this correction, this tikkun, after worshipping the golden calf. Yeah. So the real life events as they happened first time round are not as we read them through the Torah. We even see this in Mishpatim in last week's Parsha. It talks in the middle of all the laws, it stops and then carries on talking about other things that happened on Mount Sinai when the Torah was given. So that should have been included in last week's Parsha, 2 weeks ago, Yitro. Why are we catching up on events that happened on that day in a Parsha later? So we see this jumping around happens a lot, normally to teach us something. It teaches us something important when things are out of order. In this case, that God always foresees and preempts what's going to happen, and he already has the cure or the fix, the solution to our sins. So here we have, yeah. Now, more of a spiritual journey. What is going on with the temple? What does it achieve? This having a house for God. You know, God has the entire universe. Why does he want a little house for himself, which roughly measures about 50 meters by 25 meters, the parameter of it, the perimeter. Not very big. And what God needs, a little house. What's being achieved? So you have to sort of go back to the beginning to understand the sort of the flow of this. So in the beginning, of course, God created heaven and earth, Adam and Eve, and in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve understood that God was king and they were nullified before him. And God's presence was in the garden. That was God's home. He created a garden for himself, and it was heaven on earth, literally, the Garden of Eden. But obviously then there was the sin of the eating from the tree of knowledge. God's presence, so to speak, withdrew from the world at that time. And then Enosh, Cain killed Abel, so that was like another sin. God withdrew again. Then Enosh, which was Adam's grandson, started worshipping idols. So there was many mistakes that took place at that time. God's presence was sort of rejected, and there are 7 heavens traditionally. So every time there was a sin or a rebellion, God withdrew himself from the earth to the first heaven, and then from the first heaven to the second. And this process was eventually reversed with Abraham. Abraham came and he said this idol worship was rife in his time. Says, no, there is only one God. And he started to slowly bring God's presence back down from the 7th heaven to the 6th. And this process carried on with Yitzchak, Yaakov, then Yaakov's son Levi. Obviously, there were the whole 12 tribes came from Yaakov, but Levi in particular. Then Levi's son was called Amram, Kahos rather, then Amram, Moshe's father, and then Moshe. So Moshe, Avram down to Moshe, there were 7 generations. That sort of brought God's presence back down from level 7 of the heavens down to this world. Yeah, and that's why it was possible at Mount Sinai that God literally came back into this world. He hadn't been here in a manifest, revealed way since the Garden of Eden. So that's why the giving of the Torah was such a momentous historical event, that heaven and earth touched again, which hadn't happened since Adam's times. Yeah, but
How about the
with that,
7th heaven is
yeah,
the furthest away from earth?
yeah, it sounds like 7 is as far as it goes. Yeah, up to 7.
It's interesting because so that's presumably the least desirable place to be. But in
Yeah,
colloquial English, if you're in 7th heaven, it's the
oh,
best.
that expression, yes. So actually, it's funny that expression exists in that way. Yeah, that's the problem, being in 7th heaven. We want God down here, not all the way up in the highest heavens, because that means we've pushed him out. But I guess in terms of spiritual bliss, 7th heaven would be, I guess, in a way, God by himself. So I guess it could work both ways, maybe.
Yeah, if you're in 7th heaven, you'll be with him, wouldn't you? With God.
Yeah, you've sort of cheated the system, so that'll be all right. But
So
yeah,
is
our
this,
job is to bring God all the way back down. Yeah, down here. And Mount Sinai, while God's presence rested on it, there was thunder and lightning, etc. All the special effects. But then when God's presence withdrew from the mountain, there was a long shofar blast, and that was the sign that now the mountain is no longer holy. If anyone approached the mountain at that time, when God was still on it, or God's presence was on it, that they would have died. But after the shofar sounded at the end, that was to say the mountain is now mundane again. It is now regular. It's gone back to just being a regular mountain. So how do we achieve that God's presence stays down here in a meaningful way? And that was rebuilding the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Rabbi Sachs points out in many different places that when it talks about the creation of the universe, 6 days and then Shabbos, etc., 34 verses were taken up in the Torah, 34. But when discussing building the temple, the Mishkan, and all of its vessels and measurements, 444 verses are used. So somehow the whole universe can only take up 34 verses, but when it comes to building the Mishkan, 440, it's basically 13 times as many verses, which shows that for God, it's easy to create the universe, yeah? But for us to bring God's presence down, that is our mission statement, and that is why the Torah spends a lot more time delineating all the measurements, all the vessels, what they look like, etc., how they were to be made. The word vayichulu, like we make in Kiddush, vayichulu Hashemayim va'aretz v'chol tzva'am, Friday night, that God created the heavens and the earth, and then rested on Shabbos. So the same word, Vayechal, Moshe, is used. Moshe concluded building of the Mishkan, except one was done by man, the temple, and the heaven and earth was created by God himself. But the Torah is really an instruction manual of how to live down here. So it doesn't really take up as much of our time, exactly how God can create the universe. God is all powerful. Okay, he did that. But our main concern is how to bring God down here into every physical thing. And that's why we said before, mitzvah always involve a physical element to them, because we are elevating every aspect of this physical world. Yes. Did I hear a question? Actually, I can see Jonathan asked a question in the chat. Yeah, about tzedakah. Yeah, there is a priority of who to give. So generally, charity does start at home. You know, if you have family members that are impoverished, you need to look after them first. And then people in your own town, as opposed to the neighbouring town, and then where you live. Obviously, Jewish people, as we're one extended family, we need to look after ourselves as well. And then there's different forms of charity. Ideally, the best form of charity is one where you set someone up that they now have a job and they can support themselves, as opposed to one-off donations, which might not necessarily fix their problem if they're fallen on hard times. Interesting, according to Jewish law, charity, if giving tzedakah to someone means, if you want to do it in the best way possible, means restoring that person to the lifestyle that they were used to before they became impoverished. So if someone was, wealthy, ideally we try and help them back to the lifestyle that they used to have, which sounds counterintuitive, because surely you just need to help them, make sure they've got food on the table and a roof over their heads. But because as human nature has it, that once we get used to a certain lifestyle, standard of living, anything less than that will always feel like we're missing out. So it's interesting how much human nature, psyche, is taken into the mitzvah of tzedakah. Yeah, I can see if you want to do it in the utmost way, you want to restore someone to how they were beforehand. But generally, we're not able to do that because there's so many important causes and people that are desperate that we need to make sure that they are seen to. Okay, so let's look at a few of in a line. Rabbi Sachs here wrote that God took spirituality and made the physical universe, yeah? Because really everything is an extension of God, ultimately. Nothing exists outside of him. So God took or made within himself a space for the universe that we exist. And our job is to take the physical universe and to make it into something spiritual. if that makes sense. So God took something spiritual because there was nothing besides God to start with, and he made, so to speak, a physical universe. And we have to take the physical universe and sort of change it back or elevate it into something spiritual. And the Mishkan tabernacle is a microcosm for this. That all the material that we use, the 15 things that were donated, and all the articles in the temple, the ark, the table, or the shulchan, where the showbreads were placed, the menorah, the inner altar where incense was offered, the outer altar where the animals were offered. All of these, all the interactions with these things, on the one hand, very physical. You're taking animals, you're shechting them, you're spritzing blood everywhere. You're taking incense, you're burning them. But at the same time, this is in a way what we do with every mitzvah, with tefillin, with tzedakah, with Shabbos candles, with kosher food. There's always going to be this physical element, and not because there's a problem with the world. A lot of people try, and when they want to be spiritual, they run away from the world, to a mountaintop, or they lock themselves in a room and pray by themselves. Ideally, we need to engage in the world in every way possible to elevate it. Yeah, and that's why we always need to be part of a community, because you can't do it by yourself. That relates back to the half shekel. Everyone had to give a half shekel, like we read about last week, initially for the silver sockets that the beams of the cedar wood beams were placed in these silver sockets, and these silver sockets held up the entire Mishkan. So the foundation for the whole building were just these little silver sockets, but everyone had to donate towards them. Whether you were wicked, righteous, everyone had to find that money, whether you're rich or poor. So we're very much all responsible for each other. No one can be left out. Yeah, just made a note here. The ark, just to look at a few of the holy vessels in a little bit more detail. So the ark was a wooden box, but it was overlaid and underlaid, if that's a word, with gold. The inside and outside were gold. Why was it made in such a way? So ideally, we want to be gold on the inside and on the outside. What you see is what you get. We don't want to be two-faced. We want to be sincere in our service of God and how we deal with other people. That's why there was gold on the outside and on the inside. But the wood in the middle, the wooden box, the actual body of the ark, wooden. Wood is a simple material, not showing off. We'll always have to have that idea of being modest and humble. We might think, oh, I keep so many mitzvot, that I pray so long, I do so many good deeds, I'm so righteous. It's like, just remember, you're a little wooden box. Yeah, all the opportunities you have to flourish, God gave you, and you're just utilizing them to the utmost. That's why Moshe was described as the most humble man that ever lived, not because he didn't know he was great. He appreciated he was speaking to God the whole time. Yeah. But he realized that if someone else had been given his gifts, that they would use them just as well as him, if not better. Yeah. So there's a fine line between appreciating what you're good at, but also remembering who gave you the opportunity to start with. The ark itself, I have some measurements here, roughly 80 centimeters. 72 centimeters tall. So it wasn't very big. But then on top you had the little angels, the cherubim. Yeah, the gold angels with spread out wings. They were another 80 centimeters on top, roughly. So 152 centimeters, if you can imagine that, from the angels on top of the golden ark to the bottom. And the height and the width, we just did the height. The length was 120 centimeters and 72 centimeters wide, based on a cubit being 48 centimeters. But there are always slight different opinions on how long a cubit is. But a cubit is basically 6 of these, 6 fists, and a fist is roughly 8 centimeters. But there are again differing opinions. But that's the main the general accepted measurements. So there you go. It wasn't so big. And inside the ark were the 2 tablets, and also the smashed tablets were kept there. Also, an opinion of Torah was put in there, the Torah that Moshe wrote. He also wrote a Torah for all the tribes as well. And inserted into the ark on the corners were poles that it could be carried everywhere when they would travel. Obviously, because the Mishkan was set up, was dismantled and erected many different times. Often they were only in one place for a single day. In other encampments, they were up to 18 years in one place, 18, 19 years. Kadesh Barnea. So in one encampment, they were there for a very long time, but they never knew how long they would be in any one place. The clouds would lift, they would sound the trumpets, and they would set off. And when the clouds would stop, they knew, okay, now we must stop. So they had their own sort of GPS system back in the day. But really, our lives are the same. We think we make plans, what's going to be, and even tomorrow we all have plans. But God can very quickly realign or redirect us if He has other things in store for us. Yes, Lindsay.
Interesting, because what you're saying is that the Jews in the desert had to be ready to move at a moment's notice. And that's the way my parents' generation after the war conducted their lives. They never got involved in buying property. They had to be ready to move at a moment's notice. People who'd lived through the war had understood that. So it still goes on today.
Yeah, we are especially now. I think things have peaked, unfortunately, with the sort of the general direction of the country in the last, definitely since the war started. Yeah, people are always thinking, is it time to move over to Israel? Yeah, unfortunately, that's sort of returned in a small way. But yeah, as the Yiddish expression goes, "Men trachten Gott lacht." We make plans and God laughs. Very briefly, although this is a difficult concept to talk about in 1 minute. Why would God create the universe to start with, though? I know we've said that we need to make a home for Him down here, like it was originally in Garden of Eden. But we understand that there's nothing besides God, that we're just extensions of His existence. And we contemplate how God great is and how small we are, how finite we are. And we look at the universe and we appreciate that God, depending on what life form it is, inanimate or vegetation or animal life form or humans, that each one has different amounts of divine energy that brings it into being. Everything requires its own sort of package of spiritual energy and the entire universe is renewed every second. All these things are amazing, but they don't answer the question why God needed any of this to start with. And normally we try and explain it in a way of that the world was built on kindness. Olam chesed yiboneh, that the world was created through kindness. So just like you have a parent and a child, or a teacher and a student, a loving parent wants the child to experience life in the best way possible. He wants to share all his experiences and knowledge, or like a good teacher wants his student to be able to understand the algebra or whatever topic is, as well as he or she understands it. So in a way, a very simplified way, God wanted the experience of true existence that He has. He wanted to share that with finite human beings. Obviously, we can even deny God's existence. Yeah, the world is set up in such a way that many people do say, well, it just happened by itself, and there is no intelligent design, there is no creator, etc. But God basically wants us to go through this journey of realizing, oh yes, there is a God. What does He want from us? And create, like we were saying, a home for Him in this world. But why? That is a difficult question. I'm trying to suggest that when you give, going back to the beginning of the parsha, when you give a donation to someone, it said the yikhuli, you will take from me, because really the person giving is the person that really benefits. They're the one that really takes, because they had this opportunity to do a mitzvah. And you'll know this feeling yourself. When you give a gift to someone, the actual giving of a gift is often more powerful or more enjoyable than receiving a gift. Yeah. Or to shower love on someone is more of a powerful moment or experience than receiving sometimes. So God, in his infinite kindness, decided that he wanted to sort of share this experience of what it is to be God with finite human beings, and he created that space within himself that we exist, and that we go through this journey through life of slowly, as we grow and as we become wiser and more tuned in, realizing that actually God is the only true existence and that we are part of that. So the last few minutes there might have been slightly difficult to get our heads around, because whenever we talk about these things that God was, is, and will be, he was before time and space, but we live within that framework. So it's very hard for us to sort of get our heads around this idea that God always was. But what was before God? That's always the temptation to ask the question, or can God create a rock that he can't lift? These types of questions. Because we are very much stuck in the system. So it's hard for us to see beyond that. But through Torah mitzvot, through keeping God's laws and learning his ways, we slowly get to this realization that actually everything that God is doing is really for our benefit. Yeah. So that we can go on this journey and become as godlike as possible through our lives. Okay. Hope that made sense, most of it anyway. Let me just see if there any good yeah.
That was very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you all, please God, next week. Good night, all.